My husband forbade me from visiting his farm. After his death, I went, anyway. And what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about the man I had been married to for 21 years. If someone had told me that the biggest secret of my husband's life was hidden behind the gates of that isolated property, I would have laughed. But 3 weeks after I buried him, I found myself standing in front of those very gates with trembling hands, carrying a set of keys I had never seen before, and asking a question that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Why had he spent 2 decades making sure I never went there? My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 47 years old. Until recently, I believed I knew everything about my husband, Thomas. We met when I was 23, and working as a waitress in a small diner outside Asheville, North Carolina. Thomas was charming, hardworking, and unlike anyone I had ever known. He owned several businesses, invested in farmland, and seemed to have a clear plan for his future. Within 2 years we were married. Looking back, there were signs that parts of his life remained carefully hidden. But when you love someone deeply, you learn to accept certain mysteries. The farm was one of those mysteries. The property sat nearly 40 miles outside town, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills. Thomas inherited it from his late father before we met. From the beginning of our marriage, he made one rule absolutely clear. I was never to visit the farm. Not alone, not with him, not under any circumstances. The first time I asked why, he smiled and said it was dangerous. The second time, he claimed the buildings were unstable. The third time, he became strangely irritated and changed the subject completely. After that, I stopped asking. Marriage requires trust, and at the time, I trusted him completely. Over the years, Thomas visited the farm regularly. Sometimes he stayed there for a few hours. Other times he disappeared for entire weekends. Whenever he returned, he seemed emotionally exhausted, as though he had been carrying a burden he could never put down. I often wondered what happened there. But every attempt to discuss it ended the same way. His expression would harden, and he would quietly say, "Please don't ask me about the farm." Eventually, it became the one topic neither of us mentioned. Then everything changed on a rainy October evening. Thomas was driving home from a business meeting when a truck crossed the center line of a mountain highway. The collision killed him instantly. One moment I was preparing dinner and expecting him home by 7. The next, 2 state troopers were standing on my porch delivering news that shattered my world. Grief consumed me. For weeks, I moved through life like a ghost. Friends brought food, neighbors checked on me. Our daughter, Emily, flew in from Seattle to help with funeral arrangements. Yet none of it felt real. 21 years of marriage had ended in a single phone call. 3 weeks after the funeral, our attorney contacted me regarding Thomas's estate. Most of the meeting was routine. There were financial documents, insurance policies, property records, and business holdings. Then the attorney opened a separate envelope and handed me a letter, written entirely in Thomas's handwriting. The moment I saw it, my heart began pounding. "Claire," it started. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There is something I should have told you years ago but never found the courage to explain. The keys enclosed with this letter belong to the farm. I need you to go there. I need you to see the truth for yourself. Some secrets become heavier than lies, and I have carried this one for far too long." My hand shook so badly that I nearly dropped the letter. For 21 years, Thomas had forbidden me from visiting the farm. Now, after his death, he was practically begging me to go there. The rest of the letter provided no explanation. There were no details, no warnings, no instructions beyond a handwritten address and one final sentence that sent chills down my spine. "When you open the red door inside the main barn, everything will finally make sense." For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. What was hidden behind the red door? Why had Thomas waited until after his death to reveal it? More importantly, why had he spent years keeping me away? The questions became impossible to ignore. Finally, on a cold Monday morning, I grabbed the keys, climbed into my SUV, and began the long drive toward the farm. The further I traveled, the more uneasy I felt. The roads became narrower. The forests grew thicker. Cell service disappeared completely. By the time I reached the property, dark clouds had gathered overhead. The iron gates stood exactly where Thomas had always described them, rusted with age and partially hidden by vines. For several moments, I simply stared at them. Then I unlocked the gate and drove inside. The property looked far different than I expected. Instead of an abandoned piece of land, the farm appeared surprisingly well maintained. The grass had been cut recently. Several buildings looked freshly repaired. Someone had clearly been taking care of the place. That realization immediately raised another question. If Thomas was gone, who had been maintaining the property? As I stepped out of my vehicle, a strange feeling settled over me. It felt as though I wasn't alone. The silence around me seemed unnatural. Then, just as I reached the main barn, I noticed movement inside one of the distant buildings. Someone was watching me, and before I could react, the figure disappeared. For several seconds, I stood completely still, staring toward the building where I had seen the movement. My pulse quickened as I scanned the area again. But whoever had been watching me was gone. The property returned to complete silence. A cold wind swept across the fields, rustling the trees and sending fallen leaves across the gravel road. Part of me wanted to get back into my SUV and drive away immediately. The entire place felt wrong. Not abandoned, not dangerous exactly, but full of secrets. Yet after everything Thomas had written in his letter, I knew I couldn't leave. I had spent 21 years respecting his wishes. Now, for the first time, I was following his final request. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to continue toward the main barn. The building was much larger than I expected. Years of weather had faded the paint, but it remained structurally sound. As I approached, I immediately noticed something strange. The massive red door Thomas mentioned in his letter looked newer than the rest of the barn. While the surrounding wood showed signs of age, the door itself appeared recently painted and carefully maintained. It stood out like a warning sign against the weathered structure. My heart pounded as I reached for the handle. For a moment, I hesitated. Every instinct told me that once I stepped through that door, I would learn something I could never unlearn. Then I remembered Thomas's final words. Everything will finally make sense. Slowly, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. What I found inside wasn't what I expected. Not even close. Instead of old farming equipment or storage rooms, the interior had been transformed into something entirely different. The space looked more like a community center than a barn. There were tables, bookshelves, medical supplies, computers, and several small offices. Photographs lined the walls. Some were decades old. Others appeared recent. I walked forward in complete disbelief. None of it made sense. Why would Thomas hide a place like this from me? Before I could investigate further, a voice spoke from behind. You must be Claire. I spun around so quickly that I nearly lost my balance. Standing near the doorway was an older woman, perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. She didn't appear surprised to see me. In fact, she looked as though she had been expecting me. Who are you? I asked. The woman smiled sadly. My name is Margaret. I've been waiting for you. Every question in my head multiplied instantly. Waiting for me? She nodded. Thomas told us this day might come. The way she said us immediately caught my attention. Use? Without saying another word, Margaret gestured toward a hallway at the far end of the building. Moments later, several people emerged. Men, women, some elderly, some young. None of them looked familiar, yet every single one of them stared at me with expressions filled with sympathy and curiosity. There were at least 20 people standing there. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Margaret slowly walked toward me. Before he died, Thomas left instructions. She said quietly. If anything ever happened to him, we were supposed to tell you the truth. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. What truth? Margaret exchanged glances with several others before answering. The truth about why this place exists. For nearly an hour, she told me a story I could barely believe. 24 years earlier, long before I met Thomas, his younger sister Rachel had been trapped in an abusive marriage. According to Margaret, Rachel repeatedly tried to escape, but every time she left, her husband found her and forced her back. Local authorities failed to protect her. Friends were too afraid to get involved. Eventually, Rachel disappeared. For months nobody knew where she was. Then one winter morning, her body was discovered near a remote highway outside the county. She had been dead for days. I felt my chest tighten. Thomas had mentioned having a sister only a handful of times during our marriage. Whenever her name came up, he became emotional and changed the subject. Margaret continued speaking. Rachel's death destroyed him. He blamed himself for not doing more. As she spoke, I slowly began understanding why this place existed. After losing his sister, Thomas dedicated his life to helping people in similar situations. Using money from his businesses and family inheritance, he secretly transformed the farm into a safe refuge for women and families escaping abuse, violence, and dangerous situations. Many arrived with nowhere else to go. Some stayed for weeks, others stayed for months. Thomas provided housing, food, legal assistance, transportation, counseling, and protection. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For 21 years, I thought the farm was simply an old piece of property my husband refused to discuss. In reality, it was something far greater. It was a sanctuary, a lifeline, a place of survival. Tears filled my eyes as Margaret showed me photographs covering entire walls. Families smiling beside moving trucks after starting new lives. Children celebrating birthdays. Women holding house keys to their first safe homes. Hundreds of lives touched by a secret I never knew existed. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me since I arrived. If this place was helping people, why didn't Thomas tell me? The room suddenly grew quiet. Margaret's expression changed. For the first time since we met, she looked uncomfortable. She glanced toward another man standing nearby. Then, she looked back at me. Because the farm wasn't the only secret Thomas was protecting, a chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? Margaret hesitated. Then she said the words that changed everything. Claire, there was someone here Thomas never wanted you to meet. The entire room fell silent. My heart began pounding again. Because whatever secret was coming next, clearly frightened even the people who had worked beside my husband for years. And deep down, I knew this revelation was about to be far more personal than anything I had discovered so far. The moment Margaret said, "There was someone on the farm Thomas never wanted me to meet," every emotion I had been feeling suddenly disappeared beneath a wave of fear. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I simply stared at her, trying to understand what she meant. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Had my husband been living a double life? Was there another woman? Another family? After everything I had already learned that day, nothing seemed impossible anymore. The room remained completely silent as Margaret exchanged nervous glances with the others. It was obvious they had discussed this moment before. They knew something I didn't. Finally, I took a step forward. "Who is it?" I asked quietly. Margaret hesitated. Then she looked toward the far end of the hallway. "Her name is Anna." The name meant nothing to me. I searched my memory, trying to remember whether Thomas had ever mentioned an Anna during our marriage, but nothing came to mind. Margaret slowly led me down the hallway, toward a private section of the building. The further we walked, the more uneasy I became. Several doors lined the corridor. Some were bedrooms. Others appeared to be offices. Eventually, we stopped outside a small room at the very end. Margaret knocked gently before opening the door. Inside sat a woman in her early 30s. She was reading a book beside a window. The moment she looked up and saw me, the color drained from her face. Her hands immediately began shaking. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she stood up so quickly that her chair nearly fell over. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. I looked at Margaret in confusion. The woman staring at me looked just as shocked as I felt. "Who is she?" I asked. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper when she answered. "Claire, this is Rachel's daughter." The room spun around me. "What?" The woman lowered her head as tears rolled down her cheeks. For several moments, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood what Margaret said. Rachel had died over 20 years ago. According to everything Thomas ever told me, she had died without children. That was the story I had believed our entire marriage. Yet standing in front of me was a woman whose existence completely contradicted story. Margaret slowly explained. A few months before Rachel disappeared, she had secretly given birth to a daughter. Almost nobody knew about the child. Rachel had hidden the pregnancy because she feared her abusive husband would use the baby to control her even further. After Rachel's death, Thomas discovered the truth, terrified that Rachel's husband might come looking for the child. He arranged for the girl to be raised under a different identity. Only a handful of people knew where she was. Thomas spent years supporting her financially, while keeping her existence hidden from everyone around him, including me. I sat down because my legs suddenly felt weak. The young woman across from me wiped tears from her eyes. "My name is Anna Lawson," she said softly. "Thomas was my uncle." Hearing those words felt surreal. Anna explained that Thomas had visited regularly throughout her childhood. He attended school events, helped pay for her education, and quietly supported her from the shadows. To protect her identity, he never introduced her publicly as family. Most people believed he was simply a trusted family friend. "He wanted to tell you," Anna said. I looked up. "What?" "He talked about it many times." The room became silent again. Anna smiled sadly. "He loved you more than anyone. But he was afraid." The word surprised me. "Afraid of what?" Anna hesitated before answering. "He was afraid that if more people knew about me, the wrong people would find me." A cold chill ran through my body. Margaret suddenly stepped forward. "Because Rachel's husband never stopped looking." Those words changed everything. For years, Thomas hadn't been hiding a secret because he didn't trust me. He had been protecting someone. The realization hit me harder than anything else I had learned that day. All those weekends at the farm, all those mysterious trips, all those conversations he refused to discuss. He wasn't living a double life. He was keeping a promise made to his dead sister, a promise he carried for more than 2 decades. For the first time since arriving at the farm, tears filled my eyes. Because I finally understood why Thomas never told me. Not because he doubted my loyalty, because the fewer people who knew, the safer Anna remained. Yet just as I began processing that truth, another voice interrupted from the doorway. Then someone betrayed him. Every head in the room turned. A tall man named David, one of the farm's longtime volunteers, stood holding a folder. His expression looked grim. "Someone has been asking questions about Anna." The room instantly tensed. Margaret's face turned pale. "What kind of questions?" David opened the folder. "Questions about Rachel. Questions about the farms, questions about Thomas." My pulse quickened. "Who?" David looked directly at me. "The same man Thomas spent 20 years hiding her from." Silence exploded across the room. My heart nearly stopped, because there was only one person that could be. Rachel's abusive husband. The man everyone believed had disappeared years ago. The man who had spent decades searching for the child he never found. And according to David, he was searching again, which meant Thomas's death might not be the end of this story. It might only be the beginning, because somewhere out there was a dangerous man who had finally discovered the farm existed. And if he found Anna now, everything Thomas sacrificed his life to protect could disappear forever. The room remained completely silent after David revealed that Rachel's abusive husband had started searching again. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I looked around at the faces surrounding me. Fear was visible in every expression. For years, these people had believed the danger was gone. They thought time had buried the past. Now suddenly, the very threat Thomas had spent more than 2 decades protecting everyone from had returned. My eyes drifted toward Anna. She looked terrified. For the first time since meeting her, I understood why Thomas had been willing to carry such a heavy secret alone. This wasn't simply about protecting a family member. This was about protecting a life. If Rachel's husband found Anna, he could destroy everything Thomas had worked to preserve. Yet as frightening as the situation was, something else bothered me. Thomas had died only weeks earlier. Almost immediately afterward, someone started asking questions. The timing felt too convenient, too deliberate, and the more I thought about it, the less I believed it was a coincidence. Over the next several days, I remained at the farm helping Margaret and the others review records Thomas had left behind. The deeper we looked, the more impressive his secret work became. Over 20 years, he had quietly helped hundreds of people escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. Some of the letters we found brought tears to my eyes. Families thanked him for saving them. Children wrote about graduating from college because they had been given a second chance. Women described finally feeling safe after years of fear. Reading those stories changed the way I viewed my husband forever. For years, I had been frustrated by the mystery surrounding the farm. Now I realized the truth was far more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Thomas hadn't been hiding because he was ashamed. He had been hiding because protecting people required secrecy. Yet, even as I discovered the extraordinary man my husband truly was, the threat hanging over the farm continued growing. Reports kept coming in about a stranger asking questions in nearby towns. Sometimes he appeared at gas stations. Other times he visited county offices searching for records connected to Rachel. Every new sighting increased the tension, then everything changed one stormy evening. A security camera near the entrance gate captured footage of a truck, slowly driving past the property multiple times. David immediately recognized the vehicle description from previous reports. Whoever was searching for Anna had finally found the farm. That night, nobody slept. Volunteers monitored the property, while local authorities were contacted. The following afternoon, the situation escalated even further. A note was discovered attached to the front gate. It contained only a few handwritten words, but those words sent chills through everyone who read them. I know she's here. There was no signature. There didn't need to be one. We all knew exactly who sent it. The next 48 hours felt like something out of a nightmare. Investigators reviewed decades-old records. Former witnesses were contacted. Eventually, authorities uncovered information that changed everything. Rachel's husband had been quietly using private investigators for years. He had never stopped searching. However, what he didn't know was that his actions had finally attracted enough attention to reopen portions of Rachel's original case. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered evidence that had been overlooked for decades. Financial records, witness statements, and documents connected directly to Rachel's disappearance suddenly painted a much darker picture than anyone previously understood. Within days, warrants were issued. The man Thomas feared for over 20 years was finally located and taken into custody. When the news arrived, the entire farm erupted in tears and celebration. Some people hugged each other. Others simply sat down and cried. For the first time in decades, the shadow hanging over Rachel's memory was finally gone. A week later, Anna and I stood together near the edge of the property watching the sunset. The fields glowed gold beneath the evening sky. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. She smiled and handed me a small envelope. Thomas wanted you to have this if anything ever happened to him, she said softly. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was another letter written in my husband's familiar handwriting. Tears filled my eyes before I even finished the first paragraph. In the letter, Thomas apologized for the years of secrecy. He explained that every time he considered telling me the truth, fear stopped him. Not fear that I would leave him. Fear that one accidental conversation could place Anna in danger. He wrote about Rachel. He wrote about guilt. He wrote about promises. But most of all, he wrote about love. He told me that keeping the secret had been the hardest decision of his life, because it meant hiding part of himself from the person he loved most. The final lines shattered me completely. If you're reading this, then you finally know why the farm mattered. I hope one day you'll forgive me for the things I couldn't explain. More than anything, I hope you'll be proud of what we protected. I folded the letter slowly and looked across the farm one final time. For years, I believed this place represented a barrier between my husband and me. I thought it was the one secret standing between us. In reality, it represented the best part of the man I married. The farm wasn't a symbol of deception. It was a symbol of sacrifice. Thomas had spent more than 20 years protecting vulnerable people, honoring his sister's memory, and keeping a promise most people would have abandoned long ago. His greatest secret wasn't betrayal. It was compassion. Months later, after long discussions with Margaret, Anna, and the board overseeing the property, I made a decision that felt exactly right. I chose to remain involved with the farm. Together, we expanded its programs and continued the work Thomas started decades earlier. Every family we helped reminded me of him. Every success story carried a piece of his legacy forward. And every time I walked past the old red barn door, I remembered the day I finally learned the truth. My husband spent 21 years forbidding me from visiting his farm. After his death, I finally went anyway. What I found inside wasn't another family, another woman, or a terrible secret. What I found was proof that the man I loved had quietly spent his life, saving others while asking for nothing in return. Sometimes the people we think we know best still carry hidden chapters we never get to read, and sometimes, when those chapters are finally revealed, they don't destroy the story. They make it even more beautiful than we ever imagined.